The family that vacations together stays together. At least that was the plan. Except now the dastardly desk clerk is saying he can't confirm your connecting rooms.
Wait, what?
That's right, ma'am. You have rooms 201 and 709.
No, we cannot be 5 floors away from our kids.
The doors have double locks. They'll be fine.
When you want your connecting rooms confirmed before you arrive, it matters where you stay.
Welcome to Hilton. I see your connecting rooms are already confirmed.
Hilton, for the stay.
Conservative. Constitutional. It's the Andrew Cooperrider Show, keeping you informed on what's going on right here in Kentucky.
Today on the Andrew Cooperrider Show, Fancy Farm, one of Kentucky's greatest political traditions, happened almost a week ago. It's been going on for quite some time, Fancy Farm has, and well, it's been really the center of political life each and every year in Kentucky for some time. But this year does leave me asking a few questions, because it was almost a week ago, and let me ask you, how much have you heard people talking about it? How much have you gotten clips or cuts from jokes people made at the event? I mean, typically by now, we would have seen a few different cuts or a few different one-liners. There would have been a few different conversations. But outside of some live tweeting I saw from some political reporters on Twitter from the day of the event, I really haven't seen much discussion about it. And I'm going to dig into it today. We're going to take a look at a few of the different counter speeches. But I do want to discuss that first. But before we dig down into it, please make sure you like, comment, share, and subscribe wherever you're listening to the show. If you're watching it online, if you're watching this in the video platform on Twitter or Facebook, or perhaps on WBNA 21, or you're listening to this on the radio, keep in mind that you can check out the Andrew Cooperrider Show each and every day. You can head on over to theandrewshow.com. A new episode comes out daily on the audio-only format. You just head on over to your favorite podcast listening platform and search Andrew Cooperrider, or you can head over to theandrewshow.com. Once again, that's theandrewshow.com. Hit the Listen Now tab, and you'll see all the links to different places where you can catch the daily audio-only show. You can also reach out to the show there. You can hit the Contact tab, fill out a contact form, or email the show at info@theandrewshow.com, info@theandrewshow.com. So let's dig down into it again. So Fancy Farm here. Is it still an important thing really here in Kentucky? I think part of the downplaying of this year has to do with two factors. One, and well, I guess both these factors interline, and that is frankly the state has become much less competitive for the Democrats. Because quite frankly, dating back till decades upon decades, you've had elected Republicans that actually had constituents in the area. Now, historically speaking, Kentucky's had Republican senators off and on a lot more often than they've had it at the state level really since the 50s there, because you had Thurston Morton, 1957 to 68. He's a Republican. Marlo Cook, Republican, 68 to 74. John Sherman Cooper, 56 to 73. You had a little short stint there from 74 to, 85, where no Republican was exactly in office there in the federal Senate, that is. And then from 1985 on, you've had Mitch McConnell in office, and then in 99, Jim Bunning, and then that was followed up by Rand Paul. So, obviously, the point is that there has been a Republican representing or being able to be a constituent of that area for, well, darn near 40 years now. You've been able to have a Republican that's statewide elected, assuming that, of course, they showed up, of course. But you've had that ability. And then on top of that, you had Republicans in various places of statewide government. And of course, Western Kentucky has been more conservative. So maybe you've had state senators or state house reps or Congress people that were Republican coming from the area. But you've also had Democrats. You've had statewide elected Democrats. You've had maybe some local elected Democrats. So you've had both Democrats and Republicans that actually are the constituents of that area. But the problem becomes, quite honestly, is that, well, there's no Democrats really, unless Andy Beshear shows up, that has any constituents in that area. In fact, the picnic is known, of course, for any current office holders that have constituencies in that area are invited to come, partisan elections, of course. And then anybody who's challenging current sitting, Republican, Democrat that has a constituency, in that area is also invited to come. But where Andy Beshear and Jacqueline Coleman are the only elected Democrats that have any constituency in that area, well, when they decide not to turn out, which Andy Beshear did not and Jacqueline Coleman did not, you end up with no actually currently elected Democrats speaking at the event, outside of one that does not have a constituency in that area. Sherilyn Stevenson from Lexington was speaking on behalf of course, Amendment 2 in order to talk against it. We'll be going into her talk. And so that intertwines with the fact that you have no top-of-the-ticket competitive races. There's no competitive congressional races, no competitive Senate races. Presidential election's not competitive in this state whatsoever. The governor's not turning out. It's not a governor election year. So frankly, it seems kind of inconsequential and dying out. And honestly, it makes you wonder about the staying power of the event as a whole. How popular will it continue to be? Because it wasn't that popular this year. And it's also kind of a thing of a little bit of the past, of course. Because obviously the average modern voter doesn't get there. It's harder. It was harder back, 80s, 90s, even early 2000s. It was harder to actually hear the people, even at the top of the tickets, what they say, what do they speak of, what do they stand for, hear their speeches. But now you have YouTube and Facebook and Twitter. I've heard Donald Trump speak a million times on Twitter. I've heard Kamala Harris speak a million times. I've heard Mitch McConnell speak and Rand Paul, and I've heard all these people's speeches. I've heard even the constitutional officers that show up speeches. Heard them all before. Heard them online. I know what they're going to say most likely. And so because of that, I think that also tampers down the interest. But there were still some interesting points we're going to go over today on the show and probably hit maybe on some interesting points tomorrow in the audio-only format. So make sure you're catching that as well. But we're going to cover the congressional race for the Comer, of course, holds the district there in the area, the Western Kentucky district that then hooks around into Frankfort. And he's being challenged by an Erin Marshall, who you're probably like, who is that? You're not alone, of course. Everybody asked her the same thing. She's a step up over his opponent last time, though, which was an angry gay man, as I remember. Last time I covered Fancy Farm, of course. It was 2 years ago. Angry gay man, very upset on the show. I talked about that 2 years ago. But, and then we're also going to cover Sherilyn Stevenson and Suzanne Miles squaring off over the Amendment 2, of course, that's the amendment to allow a discussion on school choice in Kentucky, to basically change the state constitution in order to allow there to be passage to have funding of types of school options, school choice options. It isn't anything specific. It's not specifically vouchers or anything such as that. It is simply just allowing us to have that conversation. So we'll be discussing that as well. So we'll have both of those conversations today on the Andrew Cooperrider Show as we dig down into it. But we'll be back in a few short minutes. Once again, please listen to the show every day. Head on over to theandrewshow.com, hit the Listen Now tab. You can also reach out to the show, click the Contact tab, or email info@theandrewshow.com. We'll be back in a few short minutes.
The family that vacations together stays together. At least that was the plan. Except now the dastardly desk clerk is saying he can't confirm your connecting rooms.
Wait, what?
That's right, ma'am. You have rooms 201 and 709.
No, we cannot be 5 floors away from our kids.
The doors have double locks. They'll be fine.
When you want your connecting rooms confirmed before you arrive, it matters where you stay.
Welcome to Hilton. I see your connecting rooms are already confirmed.
Hilton, for the stay.
And you're back with the Andrew Cooperrider Show. So Fancy Farm, of course, occurred, as I talked about in the last segment. We talked about how important it may or may not be. But regardless, there was some speeches made. And Comer has an opponent, Congressman Comer, who is the congressman for the area there, the Jerome parish there in Fancy Farm in Graves County, Kentucky. And as always, I think this is pretty typical that his opponent speaks first. And so I'm going to do these in order that the opponent speaks. Now understand, all these cuts I'm going to show you, while they all are from their speeches, and I'm not trying to misrepresent anything, some of these, are super cuts where I've taken different chunks of their speeches and put them together as I was trying to illustrate a point. But let's start off with Erin Marshall and how she started talking about this speech. Let's take a listen to that.
Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Erin Marshall, and I'm running to represent the 1st Congressional District this year. We're running the first competitive campaign that Representative Comer has had to face since 2015. If you all don't remember what happened that year, he lost to Matt Bevin, which is really saying something.
So she says that it's a competitive campaign, which is a far stretch of a claim to make. To remind you all, the 1st Congressional District there is an R plus 24 district, okay? So R plus 24. That is in no way a toss-up. It is in no way competitive. Nobody would describe that as a possible competitive race unless, of course, you're an idiot. And, well, there was a few idiots who did make that argument. We'll get into that here in a second. But more importantly, it's not close. It's not a competitive race. You're as much of a competition as the gay therapist was last time around to Comer. But that doesn't stop her from, of course, trying to be positive, trying to make a few arguments. We'll listen to one of her arguments she started off making right away. Did leave me with some questions. Take a listen.
I also want to thank Congressman Comer for making his yearly visit to the western part of the 1st Congressional District. When I decided to come down here, I thought maybe we could even carpool, but then I remembered he comes down here so infrequently, I'm not sure he could find his way.
Now, she said that twice. That was a supercut, 2 different clips from 2 different points of her speech. Not a supercut, but just a double cut there. And so she made that joke because those of you who are unaware, of course, Fancy Farm is supposed to be super jovial. You're hearing people boo, people cheer. It's supposed to be getting digs on each other. The partisanship of the place is what it's supposed to be all about, trying to get your digs in. And so she's trying to make jokes on Comer, and one of hers was that Comer just doesn't arrive to the district of Western Kentucky. And I'm sorry, but that dog ain't gonna hunt. I have never heard that personally from the area. Whether it's because of Comer's constituent services or whether it's because he does often make trips down there. I think it's probably the latter, often making trips down there, of course. He is from Western Kentucky. And by down there, she means that he lives in Frankfort. That's a joke about the Comer hook. You see, the 1st Congressional District loops around to Frankfort and does like a hook up to Frankfort. So it starts all the way out in Fulton, goes straight across Western Kentucky Purchase area, then cuts low along the Tennessee border, and then angles right up into a hook into Frankfort. And while it's not a requirement, federally speaking, that you live in your congressional district, you do have to live in the state of the congressional district, but you don't actually have to live in the congressional district. If you live in Frankfort, which is where Comer reportedly lives most of the time, when he's back in the area, he lives in Frankfort. He has a house there from the time, of course, he was agricultural commissioner. But anyway, so they say they hooked that in order to put Comer's preferred home that he likes to stay in into the district, just so he can still live in the district. I mean, the fact of the matter is you have to cut up these areas anyways if you want to keep them strong R. Something that they're doing for Andy Barr, really, it was done to make his district a stronger R district. So by going ahead, because he had kind of that Frankfort area, it was hurting his district, the 6th Congressional District. And so they said, well, who can we give that to? Guthrie lives out in Western Kentucky, lives in Bowling Green. So obviously he is kind of farther away. Massey was obviously another option person to give it to. He lives out in Lewis County. That's not super duper close, and he's already picking up part of Louisville into his district. And then Hal Rogers lives out in Eastern Kentucky. But it just so happens Comer has a house in Frankfurt, does spend time there. And so who to give it to but the person who it's most convenient to cover that area, but Comer. But the hit that he somehow doesn't visit Western Kentucky, I don't think that dog's gonna hunt. That's just not a complaint I've heard before. Now, she does make some comments about what she reportedly stands for, supposedly stands for, and just shows how out of touch the Democrats are with the district. Let's take a listen to that.
And protect a woman's right to make her own health care choices. You see, Jamie Comer has an A+ rating from anti-choice organizations. For a party and for a man that professes to love small government so much, he sure loves to be in our business. He's always voted for the government to be in between you and your doctor. When I'm elected to Congress this November, I will be pro-union, pro-farm, pro-public education, and pro-choice. Jamie Comer has consistently voted against the people of our district. We might be used to seeing his face on TV, but it's not for helping us. Let's retire one of the least effective members of Congress. Let's let him go back to that home in Frankfurt that he so desperately wanted to live in. And let's send another Democrat to D.C. to take care of the people of the Commonwealth. It is time to have a representative that is working for you instead of working to get his face on Fox News. People, regardless of our differences, it is so important that we care about the Commonwealth, and I am so glad you're here. I'm preaching to the choir, but register your friends to vote, knock on doors, and help me retire Jamie Comer this November. My name is Erin Marshall, and I would be proud to be your next Congresswoman. Thank you so much.
Congresswoman. She had to emphasize that woman, didn't she? Because, of course, it's all about identity politics to the Democrats. And that just points to everything she said there, points to why Democrats continue and will continue to lose in Kentucky, because their values do not align and they can't even stop themselves. She talked about abortion 3 times. Now, remember, Amendment 2 from 2022 was the abortion amendment. This year, Amendment 2 is the school choice amendment. But Amendment 2 in 2022 was a amendment to the state constitution to say that a woman has no right to an abortion in our constitution. And it was to head off our state Supreme Court from potentially trying to read in a right to abortion into our state constitution like they did in Roe v. Wade at the federal level. And that amendment did get defeated. It was 52-48 or so, I believe, within the state. But the congressional district Erin's running in, Congressional District 1, voted for the pro-life amendment 60 to 70-ish%. Now, the Democrats, much like they're doing on Amendment 2 this year, shaped the argument of that amendment. And the argument surrounding that was that it was pro-life to vote yes and pro-choice to vote no. And 60 to 70% of the people in that district voted no. And yet, she's going to talk about abortion. That's really dumb. She's going to talk about Beshear. Beshear lost that district like 40-60. Really dumb. And look, a Dem's never going to win that district. Like, not now, probably not for, several decades, I'd probably say. But if you do actually want a chance to win, you got to leave this partisan stuff to the side. They're so drunk on the fact that Amy Beshear won. They're so drunk on the fact that they defeated that Amendment 2 in 2022 that they're not paying attention. They believe that they can win in this state by pushing for an abortion everywhere. They believe that they're going to be able to win in this state by pushing for the same things that Amy Beshear talked about at the House level, within the state level, and they're wrong. You are not Amy Beshear. You don't have Steve Beshear as your dad, 1. 2, Amy Beshear didn't win that congressional district, Erin. And Amendment 2 also won that congressional district, Erin. So the district has already spoken. They don't like Beshear. They don't like abortion. So if you're going to be a Democrat running in that district trying to win, well, you'd better leave behind this ridiculousness. Then to her point that he's somehow the least effective, he's the chair of the House Oversight Committee, for crying out loud. That's a very powerful chairmanship. The way Congress works, you do not become a chair of a committee unless you're in good with leadership. It's just a fact of the matter. Comer talks a big game, and he does a lot of good things. I'm not saying he doesn't. I'm not trying to downgrade him. But to think he's not a part of the establishment, you're mistaken. You don't get powerful positions unless they're brokered out deals on committee, like a committee chair, unless you're a part of the establishment. Comer does deliver for his district because he gets that things done and handouts from leadership. They will give him the earmarks and the projects and the bills that he wants to see passed for his district. They will make sure the amendments, they will get that done for him because he's doing their bidding, they're doing his bidding. It's a back scratch back world. The claim of least effective is ridiculous, but Comer does respond to Erin Marshall. We'll talk about that, go over his speech after this short break. You're listening to The Andrew Cooperrider Show, your source for Kentucky politics. And you're back with the Andrew Cooperrider Show. Before the break, we're going over Erin Marshall's speech at Fancy Farm. She's running for Congress against Comer. We're going to go ahead and go over to Comer's speech. He does get some points out. He is able to combat some of what she said, but I'm going to be honest. I calls him as I sees him. It doesn't start off super great. I don't like his speech initially with Comer. Let's take a listen to how he starts off. See if you see the same problems I do. Take a listen.
Now, I would be nice and introduce the Democrat leaders here, but there aren't any. I mean, this side of the stage kind of looks like our businesses and churches during Andy Beshear's draconian COVID lockdowns. Speaking of Andy, they say he isn't here today because he's applying for another job. He wants to be vice president so bad that when Kamala Harris asked him what his pronouns were, Andy replied, "pretty and please."
So, it was an okay joke initially. That's okay, but the problem I had with his opening is Comer committed a cardinal sin. Maybe it's not a cardinal sin in the world of politics per se, but to people like me, it would be a cardinal sin if I made a really good joke one year, a really good zinger, and then somebody else stole that joke from me and certainly didn't credit me, but just stole my joke. I'd be pretty upset. I'd be like, come on, man, you don't steal my jokes. And last year when Daniel Cameron was running against Andy Beshear, he said this.
We can build a future that's based on true Kentucky values instead of the Beshear-Biden radical ideology. Governor, I know you guys are obsessed with pronouns these days, but come November, yours are going to be has and been.
You can't reuse jokes like that. I mean, I think that should be a pretty standard idea, right? So starting off a little rough, the jokes didn't land as well. He's talking about lockdown things from 4 years ago, and it's just, I get it. I mean, I fought lockdowns more than like anybody else did. Totally, way more than anybody else did. People who follow me know that. But at the end of the day, people are tired of hearing about lockdowns. We know that because Andy Beshear won re-election. If people are actually upset about lockdowns and actually cared about the fact that they forced thousands of small businesses out of business and laid off 1 million people and broke and led to mass suicides from overdose deaths and mental health issues that came from the lockdown procedures. If people cared about that, they wouldn't have voted for Andy Beshear, but they don't. But, jokes to jokes, whatever. But here's something he said. When I talked earlier about Erin Marshall, and some people did think she had a chance, well, Comer mentions this. Let's go ahead and take a listen.
The top 2 races this November are for president and U.S. representative. Let me begin by sincerely asking for your vote and support to allow me to continue fighting left-wing liberal policies and deep state bureaucrats as your member of Congress. Many of you have asked if I had an opponent. Well, you just heard from her. Welcome to your first and last trip to Fancy Farm. When my liberal opponent filed for office in January, the Louisville fake news was so excited that they printed she would raise $10 million against Comer. Well, 7 months later, as usual, the Louisville fake news was wrong. But hey, they were only off by around $10 million.
Which is pretty funny. So what he's referencing is an article that was wrote early on when Erin Marshall declared that was really playing her up, acting like she was going to raise $10 million. She's going to lay the smackdown on Comer. She's going to push on abortion. She's going to do all these things. And Comer's going to really feel it and feel the competition. And frankly, it's false because it's an R plus 21 district. Or 24 district, sorry. It's an R plus 24 district. That was never going to happen. But yet, these liberals in Louisville and the political writers debase themselves pretending like there's an actual competition that Comer should actually be concerned about. And the reason why Comer doesn't need to be concerned about the Democrats at this point is because of how out of touch they are. I mentioned how Erin Marshall in the last segment talked about abortion, talked about issues that literally the place that they're in doesn't care about. Let's listen to what Comer talks about when he goes on to talk about what he views as what the district cares about. And you'll see a big contrast between somebody who knows what's important and somebody who's spent way too much time sniffing the liberal craziness and has soaked their mind in it to the point that they literally are in la la land, not attached to reality. Let's take a listen to what Comer says he's fighting for.
Because I've led the fight against runaway spending that led to Biden inflation. I have led the fight against big pharmaceutical companies, middlemen, who gouge consumers who need prescription drugs. I have led the fight to fund our overlooked waterways infrastructure, which is so vital to Kentucky farmers and our West Kentucky barge companies. I have led the fight that exposed how corrupt the Biden family has been in their influence peddling schemes, which netted them tens of millions of dollars from our enemies around the world. I have led the fight to expose the lies that deep state actors and their allies in the media told us about Hunter Biden's laptop being Russian disinformation, Hillary Clinton's Steele dossier being factual, and even Joe Biden's doctor saying he was in perfect health. And just last week, I led the fight to hold the Secret Service accountable for their negligence during the assassination attempt of President Trump. Washington, D.C. is a tough place full of bad people with no common sense, waging war each day against our fundamental values. Liberal Democrats want to ban gasoline vehicles. Liberal Democrats want to allow men to play women's sports. Liberal Democrats want to ban West Kentucky coal and replace it with solar farms in our cornfields. And liberal Democrats want to allow all the illegal aliens that Border Czar Harris allowed into the United States to be able to vote in our elections.
And that is issues that the district actually cares about. I mean, the district cares. That's such a niche issue that I think Democrats don't, literally, they can't comprehend and understand, is that in Western Kentucky, one, they're coal country. That's part of the reason why they're so conservative. But that's also what lost them Eastern Kentucky. I mean, they really started losing the blue dog Democrats in Kentucky, where they started voting red even for the presidency nationally when the Democrats really started their attack on coal, because it's so important to those areas' economies. But there's another kind of niche issue that if you're not familiar, if you don't know your district, if you haven't bothered to actually talk to people, like Erin apparently hasn't, you would know is something they're really concerned about in the Green New Deal and the green initiatives, whatever you want to call it. And that is the replacement of farmland for solar panels. That is a big concern because apparently it does damage to the soil. They're concerned about the reduction of farmland in the area. It's an important thing to their economy. On top of that, you can't grow around it, and it affects the property values of the rest of the area, and you can basically price farmers out of existence. This is something that the agricultural individuals are greatly worried about in the area. Is it the right thing to do, wrong thing to do to worry about it? You know, how much government intervention should you have on it? That's all a private discussion, but that is a niche issue to that area. Now, coming up after this, we're going to have, for our final segment, the speeches surrounding Amendment 2, the School Choice Amendment. We had Sherilyn Stevenson for the Democrats, State House Rep out of Lexington, and Suzanne Miles, who's the House Majority Leader, give a speech. I'm going to give you the take on their speeches, and it promises to be, I think, a little bit interesting, what I have to point out here. Because I got to be honest, a lot disappointed. And of course, the Republican leadership that decided to throw Suzanne Miles out there. We'll talk about why they made that decision and why I'm disappointed after this short break. You're listening to the Andrew Cooperrider Show, your source for Kentucky politics. Once again, if you want to reach out to the show, feel free to email info@theandrewshow.com. Once again, that's info@theandrewshow.com. We'll be back in a few short minutes. And you're back in this final segment of the Andrew Cooperrider Show. Now, I've talked about it on the show before, of course, Amendment 2, the School Choice Amendment. Talked about it earlier today, and there were two speakers to speak for and against the amendment at Fancy Farm. Now, I've been doing these speeches actually in order up until now, where Erin Marshall came before Comer. But what I'm going to do here, I'm going to switch it. So Suzanne Miles' speech actually came after Sherilyn Stevenson's, but I'm going to be honest, this is a horrible speech. The decision making here to put Suzanne Miles in this position, absolutely awful. There's some intricate things that are going on here. Suzanne Miles is the majority leader. She's a part of leadership. She's a little concerned about her seat. There's definitely some, leadership elections are coming up here at the start of this next session. There's some new faces coming in, 2 or 3 or 4 new faces. There's a few people that have been, I guess you'd call them, quote unquote, radicalized over to the more conservative side of things after what's happened this last time around. I'm talking about people like Bill Wesley, who bring some other people, other legislators with them. There's some other legislators that may feel a little more comfortable after seeing leadership so actively go against sitting incumbents and then seeing them lose when going against them makes them feel more emboldened. Maybe it makes them decide they want to see a leadership change. And Suzanne Miles is, a little worried about what she's doing. I mean, she's going around, she's meeting with different House members that she's concerned and trying to build more relationships with, making sure they're on their side. And so part of this leadership of the Republicans views these speeches as an opportunity to somehow buy earned media, raise somebody's name ID, but that would involve them doing like a really good job. But this is way too important of an issue. Amendment 2 is extremely, extremely important. It's important to the future of Kentucky. If this fails, we'll probably for a decade or so not have school choice in Kentucky. Getting another amendment to the ballot, constructing it right, there will be an uphill battle to say the least. Something that could get done. The people who are fighting for school choice, the people who are fighting for those amendments are very effective at getting things done, but it would be even more of an uphill battle for them. And so this amendment is make it or break it, but instead of putting forward everything, Republican leaderships are playing game and putting out what I would say was one of the worst speeches of the day, if not the worst speech. Take a listen. Maybe you'll hear it, maybe not. Maybe you think I'm being too harsh, but I just want you to take a listen to what she has to say here.
Our kids depend on their teachers and their parents to celebrate their successes and also be there with them for their frustrations. But there's another group out there that the kids really need. They need the voters' vote for yes on Second Amendment in November. The future of education depends on it. It can be the freedom for every child to strive. Not just the rich kids, but every child, the voiceless, the parents that don't have anything that they can do. to have a choice. And several ask, why would we ever do an amendment? Well, quite frankly, I have to admit I'm a little selfish on it. If we didn't have things like amendments, most of you all, half of you at least, including myself, would not be allowed to vote. So when you think about amendments, why we change it, our founding father, one of them, Thomas Jefferson, his quote, "I am an advocate for frequent change in laws and constitutions, but laws and constitutions must go hand in hand with the progress of the human mind." We no longer have a one-room school anymore. We are trying to teach these kids globally, and we want to make sure they can compete. The future is ahead of us if you believe that. And if we don't pay closer attention, half of our kids in the state of Kentucky cannot read at grade level. That's an embarrassment, an embarrassment. A third of them are not proficient in math. We have done altogether over record funding, even accounting inflation.
For those of you who may be sitting there saying, I don't know, Andrew, I didn't think it was that bad. I understand why you may say that because you don't know exactly what the speech is supposed to accomplish. So when it comes to these amendments, we saw this with Amendment 2 in 2022, the abortion amendment, already mentioned it this show. It is a race to define the amendment. What does it do? Go onto my social media. I think, Friday, I had posted about Amendment 2, why a reason to vote yes for it. I was talking about something to do with JCPS schools, setting the bar really low, and I talked about you should vote yes on Amendment 2. And read the comments, especially on Facebook. You'll see people who don't know anything about the amendment. It will be a job of people to define it. But instead of defining it, we got a meandering, non-linear speech. Who out there is saying oh, why do we need an amendment? And then instead of saying, oh, well, we need an amendment because the Supreme Court has looked at it and defined this as school choice, so we just can't do it. Instead of saying that, Suzanne Miles decides to just go off on some tangent about women's voting rights and how that's about, and then there's no continuous thought. She, at one point in that clip I showed you, she said, we have to be careful. And then she starts yelling about student outcomes. She didn't really attach the two. I understand there may be a thought in there. She probably missed the pages. It's hard, you're getting yelled at. I get that. But you gotta stay on point. And you gotta define it. Now, Sherilyn Stevenson, when she did her speech, and trust me, and I'm calling this out because I want Amendment 2 to pass. I want you to vote yes on Amendment 2. I do. But in order to get it to pass, well, I have to make sure that the people pushing forward the information on it and trying to push this and get it over the finish line are messaging and doing the right thing. And putting Suzanne Miles out there with that speech was the wrong thing. Now, thankfully, Sherilyn Stevenson kind of blew it too. It's not that she didn't define it. She did define it. Take a listen here. This is Sherilyn Stevenson going ahead and doing something that Suzanne Miles didn't do, defining the amendment. Take a listen.
Amendment number 2 would allow Rep. Miles and her buddies in Frankfort to ship dollars meant to support your schools here in West Kentucky directly to rich folks in the Golden Triangle so they could send their kids to private school. This amendment is nothing more than a Hail Mary attempt to revive failed policies, voucher policies that Kentuckians don't want, our students don't need, and the courts have thankfully blocked.
So she did a job defining it, but Sherilyn Stevenson made a credible mistake, and I think a mistake that cannot be understated. Take a listen here to some parts of her speech where she talked about a few things I want to point out.
As a first-time speaker, you could say, I'm more excited than a Republican trying to take away your lunch break. This is not what we mean when we say we want more pro-choice laws. Vouchers are just the latest example of Republicans trying to shove their unpopular and unconstitutional schemes down Kentuckians' throats. Now, I've had several teachers ask me, how can we get more Republican support for public education? I thought about it, but really the only things that I could think of are naming their schools after Donald Trump, building a big, beautiful wall between the swings and the slides and making Tennessee pay for it, or declaring that the 2020 election for class president was rigged.
Now, I think that was a bad move. And I hope they keep making that mistake because it guarantees the amendment will pass. If you turn this into a D's versus R issue, a Democrats versus Republican issue, you're going to lose. If you're going to turn this into an attack on Donald Trump, you're going to lose. Rightfully so. And I hope they continue to make the mistake because Kentucky's going to vote, like 70% for Donald Trump? The worst thing the people who want to defeat this amendment could do is to make this partisan and make it like if you're for Donald Trump, you vote yes on the amendment. If you're against Donald Trump, you vote no in Kentucky. And this just points more to how Democrats have their heads in the wind. They're not paying attention to what they're doing. They will continue to spiral downward. As soon as Beshear's out of office, based upon what I'm seeing here, they have no futures in Kentucky. Well, yeah, that's what we got time for today on the Andrew Cooperrider Show. We'll be back here tomorrow, audio only. Hope you have a great rest of your day.